We are in the middle of huge crisis and uncertainty. The COVID-19 crisis is taking a toll on leadership everywhere, and pharma leaders are no exceptions. As a majority of leaders are not sure what is vital now, what they are supposed to do, and how they are supposed to do it. There are enormous challenges, and majority of leaders have not faced such challenges before. Uh, Last few months, many leaders had to take a pay cut, downsize their teams, and more importantly, deliver bad news both up and down. Working from home for months, feeling stressed because there is no light at the end of the tunnel. What can you do to stay focused and upbeat during this uncertain time? How you can learn to reframe the situation you're facing? Who can you vent to? And what can you do to recharge when most of your usual outlets are not available? Leading effectively, especially during this crisis, need emotional maturity and a lot of patience. If you can't retain your composure in the face of frustration or adversity, you won't be able to keep others calm. And while this is really hard, how can you charge or change your focus and think about differently? This is probably the biggest growth opportunity that you ever have in your career. If only you can manage through this and make sure that your team weathers this storm too. Let's discover the power of emotional intelligence in leadership and the challenges how leader can develop these competencies to not only improve the self-management, but how they can handle the interpersonal relationship more judiciously and empathetically. Good evening and welcome to this a brand new episode or webinar dealing with such a wonderful subject like emotional intelligence. But before I go on, let me take a pause and uh, thank CredoWeb and Medicine Man and the DEPA for creating such a wonderful learning platform that brings that lot of people together and then share their views and help learn each other to manage the current situation better and develop not only that what they need to do in terms of reskilling or upskilling to manage their career well. Let me take a moment and share my screen with you. So we are going to talk about next 45 minutes or so about how do you lead with emotional intelligence. And this is such an important topic, and especially uh, in this the unstable time, this becomes even more important. Every day, and point of fact that when we are dealing with people or situations or various things in life, we encounter emotions. Emotions are very essential part of our life. We have a range of emotions, and not only that is select, but I think that it's a huge range of emotions. Yet many times we find it difficult to understand or name our emotions. So when somebody asks you that how do you feel, uh, I think that majority of people they kind of struggle in answering this question. As you see here, uh, this person talks about that. I just wanted to check on you to see that how you're feeling about everything taking place in the world right now. I was nervous about reaching out because I was struggling to find the right words until I saw this quote and I decided to go with my heart and just do it. I would rather imperfectly let you know I care than stay silent. And I think that this is inspired by the comment below by Martin Luther King Jr. And he rightly said that in the word, we will remember not the words of our enemy, but the silence of our friends. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in the moment of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at the time of challenge and controversy. Now, this is important because there are plenty of people out there, they might need your help. They might need your support. They might need your understanding within your team, outside your team, within your company, outside your company, your families, or the social circuit. I think that it's important to understand, and that's the reason that why I thought that possibly let me take this opportunity to share my views. Before I go on, I think that it's important to look at this about last weekend. Mr. Anup Sols asked on social media this question, that can you describe in 1 or 2 words the most dominant feeling you have in last 6 months during this crisis? And in a very short time we got a very good very good results, and then we try and use this data to talk about that, how people enlarge their feeling. But before I get into the results, let me also share the work of Dr. Mark Brackett. He's a professor of psychology in Yale University in the US, and he invented such a wonderful tool called the mood meter. And this is a very simple tool. So on one axis you have pleasantness from low to high. On the other axis you have energy from low to high. And rightly that you have the 4 quadrants, and each quadrant represent a different set of emotions. And if you look at that, and that's help whether in US they have done that huge number in the undergraduate, in the kids the school section, or in the work section, to find out that how that generally that the large mood of people are. Now if you look at that these 4 quadrants, on the left side, uh, the quadrant, both the quadrants, which is red and blue, are possibly that have more negative emotions. On the right side, you have both yellow and green are more on positive side. So if you look at that, the top left quadrant, which is the red, which is where that your people are more, frustrated, angry, worried, and possibly furious sometime, and those kind of very severe you know emotions. Where on the left, lower left quadrant, that you have possibly the bore, sad, helplessness, stressed, disappointed, those kind of emotions that if you really look at. And similarly on the top right quadrant, which is yellow, that you have that people, those who are motivated, energized, happy, hopeful, optimistic, those kind of thing. And lower level, you have the more peaceful, restful, blessed, grateful, fulfilled, those kind of emotions that if you really look at that. So now coming back to that, our poll, where that roughly about till the time we map yesterday night, roughly about 380 people have responded. And where do you think that most people are? Well, the good news is that this is very balanced, which means that about 49% of people are positive. They are kind of more hopeful, and about 51%, and roughly half, people are on the negative emotions they're experiencing in last 6 months. Now, what's important here, and I would like you to take notice here, is that there's a 16% people are angry and frustrated, right? While a large number, and I think that that's we must notice is that 35% of people are stressed, anxious, overwhelmed, confused, disappointed, vulnerable, and feeling helplessness. While there are on the same side that you have 21% of people, those who are motivated, energized, happy, and not optimistic, and 28% people are more relaxed and focused on what they need to do. Uh, we use, and there's a very interesting analysis as well, that these 381 respondents, if you look at that, using the four different social media platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and WhatsApp. Now, guess what? On Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp, people are more open and vocal, while LinkedIn, people are more guarded. And just for your knowledge, and I'm not making any comment on this. Okay, let's move. So this is where that we find that that leaders comes in all shape and sizes. There are leaders, those who are they talk about their plans from the rooftop. There are leaders, those who make a very charismatic presence, and there are leaders, those who are more analytics. They are more reflective. There are leaders who are more insightful, inspiring, and so on. But all these leaders, if you really look at that, the successful among them have one thing in common. They all have a high degree of emotional intelligence. And what I mean by emotional intelligence, their ability to understand their own emotions and the impact of their emotions on others. And also that this the understanding of emotion guide them that how they deal with other people and the situations more effectively. And that is what that make them successful. We have seen in life that most of time when you look at the skills like technical skills or IQ, which is fundamentally very important in terms of getting a job or getting entry into the job. But once you are in an organization, the technical skills and IQ are no longer distinguished competencies, which means that there is hardly, we don't see that too much of difference within the organization as far as these two abilities or capabilities are concerned. While emotional intelligence makes a significant difference. A majority of time we have seen that as you grow up in a leadership position or handle responsibility of increasing responsibility, you will find that emotional intelligence becomes even more important for your success. And many times we find people are hired for IQ but fired for EQ. If you remember, sometime early last year, one of the head of the organization, a very brilliant guy and wonderful track record. In point of fact, that he was managing director and chairman of a large multinational company in India. He lost his job. Not that he did something wrong. Only thing is that he wanted to do something possibly that hurriedly, and where we kind of messed up with people, and that's where that we talk about the emotional intelligence. And I'm sure that this is not the only the isolated case. There are plenty of such things where the leaders make mistake in reading the right situation due to this very competencies. During crisis, this becomes even more important. That's the reason that why we are talking about it. Now, let's understand, because majority of time when we look at the emotional intelligence, people have a very limited and a very narrow view on emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is a very wider subject. And let me take this opportunity to get into this 5 components of emotional intelligence. The first to start with the self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and the social skills. Now, these all are subject in itself, right? So what we will do is that out of these 5, we'll focus on possibly the self-awareness, self-regulation, and empathy a little bit more detail, and we'll just touch upon motivation and social skills. By the way, social skills or the social intelligence is a separate subject or topic at this point of time. In point of fact, currently there is a lot of work is going on social intelligence, and that possibly that in future that you will find this very interesting area for leaders to work on. Okay, so let's start with what is self-awareness. As we talk about self-awareness, is start with understanding your own self and how do you see yourself. Realistic self-assessment of what you can do, your capabilities, what you're good at, and what you need to get better. What I say is realistic, which means that you have a fairly good understanding of yourself and not you're overrating yourself and things like that. The other part is that self-depreciating sense of humor, which means that how you diffuse even a very critical situation by cracking a joke on yourself, and you feel comfortable about that talking about yourself, right, in a manner using your wits. And finally, that how you exuberate confidence when you're talking about things that which your ability to do, which is important part. I think this is again that very important area that the leaders, those who see themselves clearly, also see their companies clearly. And let me think a couple of things that which comes to my mind, and especially that getting into a new business, launching a product or launching a new initiative. And many times that people, those who lack self-awareness, especially the leaders, those who lack self-awareness, they make a poor assessment of the situation and things. Many times that in order to get favorable things, they inflate the figures, right? Knowing possibly that this might not be possible to do that, but still they are able to do so. So it's this, in a business terms also, that self-awareness is a hugely important competency. The other part of that, looking at that, how do you deal with your own frustrations and possibly that disappointments. And this comes to my mind is that there's this girl that she worked on brilliantly on a project, but then somebody else was given a charge to lead the project. She understood that she is hugely frustrated and disappointed. What she did was that she went to her manager and team and talk about is that this is how I'm feeling. You need to bear with me. Give me some time. I will able to soothe myself, and then I will completely support the project. Now that's the brilliant example that where that person is not hiding the feeling or emotions. It is natural to feel bad, but then expressing very clearly and not feeling bad about expressing the bad feelings, right? And this is, I think, that wonderful example of huge self-awareness. Let's get self-awareness, the neuroscience basis, and I'm taking this liberty because knowing our audience that well, pharma, possibly that we all understand the brain much better than the layperson. Let's understand the brain and especially the limbic system, which is the brain, and we know that these are the emotional center of the brain. And this is the most important part. It's also called primitive brain or a reptilian brain. It has taken a million years of development. So when we are born, we are not born clean slate. We are born with inbuilt ability to possibly that survive, and that's where that the major function of limbic system is help us survive, and that's where that you have those responses called fight, flight, and freeze is from the limbic system. So anytime the limbic system perceives this as a threat, it gives us a signal, or our body prepare ourselves for these function, and that help us survive in this world. Now, over a period of time, as the civilization grow, there's hardly any physical threat. But then there are other kind of threat which is also now perceived by limbic system as a threat to survive. There's a difference of opinion, conflicts, or any situation where that we are there. And that's where that we have the other part of the brain, which is basically the prefrontal cortex, and that comes into play. And prefrontal cortex decodes and help us understand, decide, recall, memorize, or inhibit the limbic system or the extreme thing. In a normal situation, these two brains work in a synchronized manner, in a very well integrated manner, and that's how that we talk about. So the prefrontal cortex is also called as our thinking brain or executive decisions. Usually, this brain is fully developed by the time that we reach mid 20s. And that's the reason that it's important that in the teenage, those, that the behaviors or unruly behaviors over as a age grows, the people are much more better in dealing with those situations and things like that. Now, this is important. There are two factors which are very important, and I would like to, and I'm not getting into too much of details, but I like, first, please understand that the development in human being is from bottom to top. So when we look at that, brain is something that which has developed possibly much later than any other part. And similarly, that limbic system is developed and prefrontal system is developed possibly much, much later. And so it's very, very primitive. When we talk about self-awareness, there are two things which are important. One is the limbic system has all the inventory, what has transpired throughout our life. It has a tremendous data. And the basal ganglia, when we talk about, is a storehouse where all the transaction has happened in the past is stored, which means what has worked for us and what has not worked for us. The only thing is that because it's primitive, it's not developed the ability to use the text. So what it does, it gives a signals. A person that who is self-aware is tuned into these signals, understand these signals very well, and then respond. The person who lacks self-awareness, possibly that still need to develop that, what is that? And that's the reason that where you see that for anything, what happened in case that you're fearful or you're angry, you see the physiological reaction first. And what is the physiological reaction? You see that the heartbeat goes, the palpitation goes up, which means the heart is preparing yourself for possibly fight if you're angry, right? Your limbs have more blood flow, and your face has more blood flow. Your people get dilated and things like that. These are right. And these are the physical sensation where kind of you feel uncomfortable about, right? So the people, those who are self-aware, they understand. The other part is also very important when you try and deal with that. And that's the next topic we talk about, that the self-regulation part, but I'm just preempting that. When you look at that, these signal last for anything between 60 to 90 seconds. The people, those who are in self-control, they know how to deal with these 60 to 90 seconds to effectively understand. But many times when the perception is too strong in the limbic system of threat, that subdues or ignores the prefrontal cortex. So you're not able to analyze anything. You're not able to understand anything, and it works automatically. Now, this is the time that, you know, what the effective strategy that majority of time we're dealing with the heightened emotion, or what we call it, that emotional hijack, where you 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 are, your limbic system takes control and prefrontal cortex is subdued and it's not in sync. Possibly that out of rage people do something that which they regret the rest of their lives. And I'm not getting into details or examples. I think that each one of us, we know that when the amygdala hijack happens, what happened, uh, uh, what kind of actions that can happen is really, really fatal. What is the most effective strategy that they do? And point of fact that in social emotional learning in the schools, and especially in the US, that they taught is that look at the traffic light signals. When you see red, when you're angry, you're fearful, stop, right? And that's where that's the time that when you look at that, those emotions, and that's where the mood meter, those red, top left hand quadrant as a stop. And stop means breathe, which means that you're distracting yourselves. Also that when breathing help you to really refocus or uh, integrate with your prefrontal cortex, and then you try and analyze and understand situation. The moment you do that, possibly that you're, if you're persistent anger, they say that sleep over it, right? Change that, and that's where that those are very effective strategies. So this is the one part that I would like you to remember, and we will use that some of these in later examples as well. The other part is the stress. Remember that our example that nearly 35-36% of people are highly stressed and overwhelmed or anxious. Now, stress is not all that bad. Stress is very important in life. And why? Because there is a stress which is good. And because of this stress, we can achieve a remarkable thing in life. Because this stress positively challenges us, right? Motivates us to do certain things that which otherwise that we find impossible. This also promotes the well-being, right? This also enhances our performance, concentration, focus, or whatever that we talk about. On the other hand, when this stress goes beyond our ability to cope up with, where we don't see any relief inside, this stress is bad. The cortisols, which make us physically sick, weakens our immune system, and ultimately impairs our performance. Let's look at that what happened here, and this is where that we talk about that for anybody, there's a optimal arousal in the PFC or the brain is very important. In absence of that, we kind of most of the time that are distracted, disorganized, forgetful, and inhibited. And that's where that all the time that you see that people are doing on mobile or a screen and things like, they have nothing important to look at that. What they are simply that engaging with those tools to fight their boredom. which means that there is not enough challenge, there's not enough stress that help them to move in doing something constructive. And that's where that when you have the, you know, the stress or the positive stress, that challenges your prefrontal cortex abilities, and that's where that you start looking at that your attention, your concentration, your focus, your being responsible, your skills are being challenged. And this is where that you know that it's called most of time what that again that Mahali, that psychologists call it the zone or the flow. And this is where that your abilities are challenged, which means that you are in peak of your performance and you are in a state of flow where you nothing else matter than possibly that what you're doing. And that's where that there are examples that neurosurgeon was operating on a patient and the part of the OT roof caved in. And after the operation, when he saw that, he didn't know that because during the operation, he didn't take notice of what has happened around. He was so much concentrated and so much focused on what he's doing. And that's where the people achieve a great results, right? And this is all part of what we call it, the stress, right? So understand that how we balance that negative and the positive stress. So that brings us to the next point is self-regulation. Self-regulation is nothing but more importantly that how do we think before acting? How do we recognize our own emotions and especially the disruptive emotions or impulses? And how do we control those disruptive impulses? Think about the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, right? And how do we subdue the limbic system when you have a disruptive emotions, and then activate your prefrontal cortex so that you take, you know, your thoughtful action. So which is very important. All this we talk about the VUCA word. We live in a uncertainty. We live in a mortality. We live in a ambiguity. We live in you know all kind of complex systems and things like that. How do we feel comfortable about those things? Because that's a part of our life, whether we like it or whether we deny it. But then that's increasingly part of life. And then other important factor, and which is very important, is the integrity, which means that even the toughest situation, how do we act in a principled way, in line with that what feels right, and again that listen or tune into our gut feeling, right? We talk about that, the basal ganglia. We talk about the strategy, what is working, what is not, and that is what that lead in an integrative world if we are self-aware about this. Developing, I think that's important. The leaders who control their feelings create an atmosphere of fairness and trust. And majority of time, when especially when the things go wrong, and things will certainly go wrong sometimes, right, or most often, how do we really that take a pause and think about that what lesson you learn, and how do you do the things differently to get there. I think that when you look at the growth mindset is all about this, right? Which means that when we are challenged, how do you accept the challenge and learn from the mistake and not really that feel bad or continue to feel bad and depressed about things not working for us. Now, this is something that which is tremendously important during the period like this, during the crisis, where there are many things that we are experimenting and many failures we are encountering. Now, instead of getting overwhelmed by possibly that something is not working or the failures, how do we look at that what lesson we are learning and how do we keep on doing something which is value to us? I think that's important, and that's where that you as a leader you create in climate where that there is a trust and there is a that respect for each other, which is important. Now, you might have seen this when things go smoothly, everything is in coordination, right? And there's a wonderful display of any act, which is where that we see that, the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex work in synchronized and harmony. And this is possibly that when we look at in a normal situation, in a crisis, and especially that if you allow limbic system to take over, I think that we all are overwhelmed. We all feel that much stress, and that's where that act before think before you act is important. It's important to control the disruptive emotions. It's very important to look at the traffic light and say that the red means stop, breathe, sleep over it before you act. The other part, I think that this is something that which is important, and this happened many years back in Stanford with that 4-year-olds kids, and basically the kids of professors in Stanford. So the psychologist, what he did was that in a room where that this room is very closely watched, put a table and a chair, and on table that there is a plate where that you have a juicy marshmallow, and then you tell the kid that look, this is for you. You can have it now, or if you wait for 15 minutes, you will have 2 of such marshmallow. Now I leave it to you. You have a choice to have 1 now or possibly 2 next 15. Guess what happens? It's very difficult for a kid to resist the temptation. So about 1/3 of the kid, they kind of look at that and they can't resist, and then they eat within the first few moments of the marshmallow. Okay. There are other kid, and another that 1/3 of the kid that possibly that they try and distract themselves. So they try and that all sort of funny things to distract themselves. They touch the smell and then keep it there. They nib, bite, and things like that, and then possibly that they couldn't resist and then eat it. But there are kids, those who are kind of, they know that what it is. They wait for 15 minutes and then they get to. Now, guess what? These all kids were studied for next 14 years. And after 14 years that they have seen, and there's a research published and say that there's those kids, those are able to delay their gratification. They are much better in their academic performance. They're much better in their social behavior. They're much better in possibly that dealing with others. So the delaying gratification, which is a discipline, has much more meaning than anything else. We live in a world today of instant gratification. That's what that we also, that many times our kids are they want that everything instant. The moment that anything gets delayed, take the internet speed or internet not available, and what happened to people, right? Or anything that which we talk about. So the delaying gratification is very important in terms of developing the self-regulation, where that you're able to control your disruptive emotions. That's something of huge value in the current situation. Third, we talk about the motivation, which is basically that how do you bring the energy or passion to work? How do you see the standard, especially your own standard, and then you're not compromising or having the same standard for your team? And finally, that the commitment and the optimism. So everything is, this is again that motivation. Uh, I'm not spending too much of time because I know that most of people that know or kind of heard about motivation, which is important. But it's important that this is something that which is contagious. So drive to excel in a leadership is contagious. Let's get to the fourth element, which is empathy. And empathy is very important. Empathy is that how not only we tune into our own emotions, but also understand the other person's emotions. How do you see that? How do you ability to sense the mood, ability to sense that how the other person is saying, the ability to read between the lines, so what is not being said, the skill with the group dynamics is important. So leaders need to understand team members and help them to collaborate is absolutely important, right? How do you sense that what is happening around that, and what kind of and and majority of time that you will see that this is a unique ability where that you understand that what kind of emotion the other person might be undergoing, and that will help to bring only the teams together and perform better. Uh, and I think this is single most factor that we have seen that people don't leave organization, people leave their managers, which is important that and those of more empathetic managers possibly that have a less more retention of people, more satisfaction in terms of that the people are performing, the more engaged people are there. Uh, Now, quite often when we ask people that what empathy is, this is a very usual answer they talk about is stepping into other person's shoes and feel the way that they are feeling. To me, that's a very narrow depiction of empathy. Empathy in itself is a huge subject. And let's spend a few more moments and understanding what empathy is a little bit more detail. And how do you develop empathy? So I would say that empathy, basically there are three types of empathy. The first type of empathy is what we talk about, that intellectual or cognitive empathy. And what I mean by cognitive empathy is that ability to understand another person's perspective, which is in simple terms is that uh, if I have able to understand how you think, possibly that I will able to help you to perform better, right? So when you understand the other person's perspective, it's very possibly that is much more easier for you to understand and help the person to perform better, and that's a cognitive. And usually that is that how do uh, I I know that how the other person is thinking. Now I would say that you look at your kids, they understand very clearly that how you think. So when they want something, they know that what kind of tactics they you need to use to get what they want, right? That's also is a negative side of cognitive empathy. And what I mean by negative side is that if I know how you're thinking, I have power to manipulate you, to make you do certain things which I want you to do it. Now you need to be conscious about that empathy is not always, that is positive. The manipulation, when I want you to do certain things, I will able to do because I know how you think. So I have power to manipulate you. So be conscious about that. The second part of empathy is the emotional empathy. And emotional empathy is that, as you say, the stepping into the other person's shoes and see that we are pinch. The ability to feel what other persons are feeling. Now, this is important, and especially important that uh, we have what we call is that mirror neuron. And mirror neuron is that they tune in with the other person and help us to actually feel what the other person is feeling. And that's the reason that why possibly in terminal illness or oncology ward, why the nurses are able to relieve pain of the patients, because they can feel their pain, right? And there's a huge help in terms of, I know that I handle um, MS portfolio, and one of most of the counselors, they say that there are patients, those who insist that give me a call every day and just say hello. I think that that's a good enough, even if you don't have time, right? So there's a huge impact on relieving the other person's anxiety and pain. And today's time, I think those kind of situation, those kind of emotional empathy is very, very necessary in terms of that. How do you manage your team and see that what you can do? The negative side of emotional empathy is that actually that you feel, when you feel the other person's emotion, you feel the same kind of emotions within you. So you undergo the same kind of trauma as the. So look at the 3 years old or 2 years old kid. If if they are playing together and one kid get hurt, the others start weeping. Why? This person actually feeling the same pain what the other kid is saying. So the mother need to really soothe the, and that's what the emotional empathy is all about. The third kind of empathy is that empathetic concern. An empathetic concern is the ability to sense what other person needs from you, and which is the hugely important. So if I need to punish you in order to get certain things which is in interest of you, I will not hesitate to do that. And that is what it is. Think about that. If you need to discipline your kids on certain very important factor, you will not hesitate to do something that disciplines them. So understanding or sensing what other person needs, and you will not really that think twice before acting. That's the empathetic concern. So when we look at that, the entire gamut of emotional intelligence, this is something that will possibly that help us deal with many situations in life in much better ways. Finally, we come to what is called social skills, which is again that how do you uh, deal with the social interactions? What we when we deal with the larger teams, what kind of expertise that we need to have? How do you exuberate the influence of persuasiveness when we are looking at that? And how do you put everybody together and help them collaborate with each other in order to really work across the organization objectives and things like that. Now social skills, if you look at that, the four self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, and empathy, when you put all these things together, and that's where that it helps in the social skills. Now, many times that when we talk about those coffee machines in the offices or say ideal schmoozing, is actually relationship building. It's a network. When you call people for lunch or go to pantry for a small meeting and then things like that, I guess that those are very natural things where that you are taking work out of work and then try and dealing in a way that which is possibly that is more lighter than the work environment to get things done. Those skills are hugely important when we look at that. So the good news is emotional intelligence is a learnable skill. So it's not just that you are born with it and you can't change it. You certainly change it. In today's life, this is not something that which we say nice to have it, but emotional intelligence is something that you need to have it. I don't think that in a leadership position, this is possibly that most distinguished competency which differentiate from a successful leader from an average leader. So this is something that which is important. We have plenty of resources in terms of how do we assess what you need in these 5 elements and how do you develop those elements. If anybody possibly that need a further help or assistance in how to develop those things, please get in touch with Mr. Anup Sones, and we would be, or me, will be very happy to assist you in this area. Finally, before I say thank you for your attention, I think it's important to engage in a, what we say, that collective learning. Your opinions, your concerns, your questions, your observations are very important. I would be delighted that if we can share that your insights, possibly that will help everybody to learn together. And so I invite you to join the discussion forum, and let's discuss this further. Thank you very much, and possibly that I think that sooner or later this crisis would be over. So it's important to have the patience and have the confidence and trust that you will kind of find the growth opportunity during this crisis. Thank you very much, and all the very best to you. Thanks.